So normally I don't do single book reviews for YouTube. I save them for my book club. I do them here on my couch, more casual. The reason why I don't post them on YouTube is because single book reviews don't perform that well, and the people in my book club are readers very similar to me, so they're more interested in hearing my kind of deeper thoughts about a particular work. But this book is popular enough, and I feel like my opinion of it is contrarian enough to warrant sharing it here on YouTube. And of course, I'm talking about Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, which is kind of the final boss of the Lit Bro books. A lot of people say that McCarthy is one of, if not the greatest American writer, certainly the greatest American writer of the last 50 years. People say that Blood Meridian is the great American novel. It's the best Western ever written. Right on the back of the book here, it's compared to Moby Dick, the Odyssey, the Iliad, and yeah, I don't agree with a lot of that. So let's set the stage here. What is my experience with Cormac McCarthy? I've only read The Road and All the Pretty Horses. I've seen No Country for Old Men. I know that doesn't count as reading the book, but of all movie adaptations, that one is probably, from what I've heard, the most faithful adaptation there is. And people have even said to me, if you've seen the movie, you kind of don't want to waste your time reading the book because they're that similar. I really enjoyed the film, and I thought All the Pretty Horses was pretty good. Didn't blow me away. We did a full podcast episode on it in our first year, so you can go back and watch that older episode if you want some of my thoughts on it. So I wasn't super stoked on Cormac McCarthy to begin with. I didn't think he was bad by any means, but I just wasn't in love with him in the same way that a lot of other people are. And then when the news came out about him grooming that child and who became his mistress, and then you kind of started to look a little bit deeper into his life, and you saw this pattern of him dating or having relationships with women much, much younger than him, and then a lot of other rumors, which I won't get into because they're a little bit less confirmed. It just was kind of gross, and people often write themselves into their books in some way, or their ideas are kind of hidden under the surface. And there was a lot of commentary from McCarthy fans who said, yeah, you know, certain situations or scenes or characters in the books read a little bit differently, knowing that he was a little bit of a pedo. So that kind of really cooled my interest on reading more of his books. I mean, the guy's dead, so it wasn't really a situation of like, oh, I don't want to support him, which I think is totally valid. Like, I'm not going to go out and read any Neil Gaiman books because that guy's a creep. But I also just didn't really want to read good books about bad people and bad things, right? Oh, that guy wrote pedophiles really well. Yeah, that's not something I'm that interested in. So I actually gave away all of the Cormac McCarthy books I had in my collection, except for Blood Meridian, because it was such a highly lauded work. I was like, okay, I have to give this a chance. So with that said, I went into this with as unbiased of a mind as I could. Now, maybe it's not possible for me to be completely open-minded about it, but I didn't go into it looking for reasons to dislike it. In fact, I really enjoyed reading it for the most part. It was probably one of my more enjoyable reading experiences this year. I thought the story was very engaging. I thought the writing was very beautiful during the beautiful moments and very disturbing and visceral during those parts, which I appreciate when a book has a certain level of realism to it. But that doesn't stop me from feeling like this is one of the most overrated books I think I've ever come across. Now, calling something overrated is really interesting because something can be overrated because people think it's good and it's not good. But something can also be overrated because something is very good, but people just blow it way out of proportion, which I think is the case with Blood Meridian. So much of this book felt to me like Cormac McCarthy was trying to write a movie script and get this adapted into a film, which makes a lot of sense because that is something he did do in his career, And that is a very lucrative thing for writers to do. Now, there's been rumors about a Blood Meridian film adaptation, and I think it would make a fantastic film. I hope that project gets completed, and I will go see it if it happens. But the preamble at the beginning of every single chapter, which is really just like a list of names and places and kind of alluding to what's going to happen in that chapter, that read to me like a list of establishing shots in a script. A lot of the scenes in the book felt like they were written like movie scenes, where they were just a little bit too neatly put together, and the action in the scenes was a little bit too like gung-ho 80s action hero movie. I also felt like the violence was just way overdone, and it's not like I'm squeamish and I couldn't handle it. It just kind of, I was like desensitized to it because of how much there was. And a lot of it didn't really seem to serve the story very well. And I'll use this as an example. The scene where the kid goes into the bar and they all speak Spanish, nobody speaks English, and he wants to sweep up the place in trade for a few drinks because he doesn't have any money on him. And so he goes and sweeps the place, and then the bartender kind of laughs him off, and he's like, "You're a sucker. You know, we're not going to give you any drinks." And then there's a fight, and the kid, despite being 14 or 15 or however old he is, he completely easily outmaneuvers the bartender, right? And he ends up stabbing the guy through the eyeball with the glass, which seemed completely unnecessary and honestly a little bit out of character for who the kid ultimately becomes in the story. So stuff like that, and there's a lot of that throughout the book. I mean, I could pick out a few different examples, but that really sticks out in my mind. It's like, it felt like McCarthy was just trying to appeal to guys. It's like this testosterone riddled, here's this kid and he's got these special skills and people underestimate him, but he's actually a badass and he's, you know, kind of untouchable in that way. So I just thought that a lot of the violence was unnecessary, didn't serve the story, and again was like written in a way that was tempting for movie producers to turn it into a film. But absolutely for me, the most overrated part about this book, and this is going to be so controversial, I can't wait for the comments on this, is Judge Holden. God damn, is this an overrated character? Everyone talks about Judge Holden. So many people comment on my posts, even when they have nothing to do with Blood Meridian or Cormac McCarthy. People will find a way to bring up the judge and basically lick this guy's boots. And I thought the judge was completely two-dimensional. Here's the thing about bad guys, is if bad guys are completely unbeatable, they're infallible, they're godlike, they're not very interesting characters because it's flaws that make characters interesting. And the judge didn't really have any. In fact, it seemed like the book was trying to say that he actually wasn't human, and poking around online, it seems like that's how a lot of people also read this character. Like he's immortal or he's some sort of demon or godlike figure, which made no sense to me because the whole book is based on the brutality of reality, and then you insert this supernatural character into the story. It just seemed very goofy to me. And why do I give a shit about Holden if he's immortal and infallible and unbeatable? Like, what's the point of the story then? There was no point in time where I was made to empathize with this villain, so that's kind of boring. There was no time where I felt like he was a beatable or surmountable character, so that's also boring. The outcome is just inevitable in that way. And if that's like the lesson of the book, it's inevitable, death is inevitable, or there's going to be forces that you can't overcome. I mean, like, cool, sweet philosophy. If this is supposed to be a masterclass of philosophical work, that's kind of boring and like basic. In general, the judge just seemed really out of place to me. It's like he would go on these long, preachy sermons and he would try to philosophize about the world to people who were literally illiterate, because then you have this guy that's like just going on these masturbatory rants to people that it's falling on deaf ears. It doesn't matter. No one's going to become a different person because of what he's saying or behave differently because of what he's saying. the whole character just seemed really pointless to me. So then it's like, what makes Judge Holden interesting? I mean, his personal code seemed pretty obvious. He stated it plainly, like, war is God, and he thinks that effectively domination is the end all be all, and he wants to dominate everyone and everything he comes in contact with. That's why he vigorously kind of journals his experiences with the natural world. That's why he keeps the invalid on a leash and totes him around. And that's kind of why he didn't like the kid, because the kid, his will would not be broken to, behave in the way that Holden thought that the world worked. But then he just like kills the kid at the end in the outhouse, which is like kind of goofy. I thought the ending was probably the worst part, when they're like, don't go in there, don't go in the Jakes. And then he goes back into the bar and he's like dancing around, and they're talking about his nimble feet, and he's singing this cute little song about how he's never going to die. I just thought the whole thing was so goofy. People in my book club absolutely love this book. This is one of their favorite books. McCarthy's one of their favorite authors. And like people like Mike from our book club said that he watched a 6-hour lecture series about Holden. And I'm just like, about what? Ultimately, I thought that Glanton, Brown, the kid were much more interesting characters. And given that people say that this is the pinnacle of Cormac McCarthy's writing, I'm not super compelled to go and read more of his books at this point. Given my experience with them thus far, which I would put them in they're good, but they didn't blow me away category, and then like who he was as a person, like I just don't really care that much about what this guy had to say. And honestly, like reading this kind of made me feel like Cormac McCarthy was a bit of a pretender. And that was something that was alluded to in the article that came out about him grooming that young girl, was that like at the end of his life, he had all these cars and this property, and his house was just like filled with like materialistic junk because he was pretty wealthy. But he portrayed himself as this rugged, mysterious, aloof kind of cowboy figure. That's what a lot of his books are about. I think this guy was honestly a talented writer that was kind of a loser and just like trying to be something he was never going to be. And I think that's why Holden kind of falls flat for me. I think that McCarthy tried to write a character from some place of personal experience, and he just wasn't the guy. He wasn't the badass, the badass that he tried to make Judge Holden to be, and it just kind of came out flat and goofy to me. I'm sure I'm going to get lambasted in the comment section. I will probably reread this at some point because I do think that there might be a little bit more there that I missed, but I don't think it's that much. I liked it enough that I would reread it again, especially if they're going to come out with a film. I'd probably want to reread it before I watch the film so I could get a better handle on how the adaptation is done. And I enjoyed it enough. Like I get why people like it, especially guys. It's an action-packed book. It kind of scratches that like innate masculine like desire for violence or roughness that guys can have. So I get it, but I don't think it's the literary masterpiece that most people make it out to be. I would probably rank it pretty high in the overall American canon, but is this on the level of a Moby Dick? I don't think so. Was McCarthy on the level of a Steinbeck or even Hemingway? To be honest, I don't think so. Tell me how stupid I am. Tell me how wrong I am. Drop a comment and let me know what you think of Blood Meridian.